Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Jim Dao, the opinion editor. On today's panel, all politics are local. Our Massachusetts Senator, Elizabeth Warren, has endorsed oyster farmer Graham Platner in Maine's Senate race. That's a primary battle that has implications for Democrats all over the country. Later, we'll discuss Boston Mayor Michelle Wu and the political hardball she's been playing. But first, Suffolk District Attorney Kevin Hayden has charged a police officer for shooting a man who was trying to flee in a stolen car. There's a complex political story behind that decision. Here to help explain it are ideas writer Abdallah Fayyad and opinion columnist Joan Vennochi. So this Boston police officer, Nicholas O'Malley, is charged with killing 39-year-old Stevenson King. In a recent press conference, Kevin Hayden said King had stolen a car and was frantically trying to drive away from the officers who were yelling at him to stop. O'Malley shot into the moving vehicle. He told investigators he fired into the moving vehicle because he thought another officer was in danger of being run over. Hayden said prosecutors aren't buying it. So, Joan, this is becoming the biggest controversy of Hayden's career. This is a guy who sort of ran as the centrist candidate back in 2022 and was considered quite close to the police and the police union. So what are you to make of this? Is this a shift in his part? Is this sort of a political move? He's in a re-election campaign. What do you make of it?
I think the politics on this one are really strange, to be honest. As you just said, I mean, the last time he ran, he was basically attacked for not being progressive enough. And now he has sought manslaughter charges against a police officer, and this is the first time in, I think, 3 decades that it's happened.
Really?
Yeah, really, so he's the last person really you would expect to do this. So why did he do it? I mean, there are several theories out there. One is that he and Mayor Michelle Wu have become pretty close. She had endorsed his opponent the last time around. She's now said that she's endorsed him. Leading up to this, he endorsed her when she ran for mayor and has kind of been at her side during some of the press conferences that she's held on issues involving immigration. So I guess I don't really know the answer to the question. I mean, is he trying to ingratiate himself with the mayor? Is he trying to sort of recreate his image? Either way, I don't know that he anticipated the backlash. It's really been pretty big.
What do you think, Abdallah?
I think that's right. I mean, one of the most starking observations about Hayden and Mayor Wu is that, that Democratic primary in 2022 was extremely contentious. And even through all the controversy with his opponent, Ricardo Arroyo, Wu didn't back down from her endorsement at first.
Of Arroyo.
And it seemed, like she was very much vehemently opposed to the now district attorney. And over time, that animus seems to have melted away. And I think that's a really interesting factor in this. But I also think, it might be too soon for us to come to any conclusion as to why the district attorney did this. As you mentioned earlier, I mean, Hayden was the police candidate. He was pro-cop. He was more status quo or, old status quo of what a district attorney, should be like and act like, more tough on crime, and most significantly more pro-cop than his opponent. And so, making this decision, especially not going through a grand jury first to make the charges, at least to, shoulder the blame to somebody else so that he could have some political cover, just makes me think that, the body camera footage is really, really bad, and that it's really convincing, and that maybe it would be worse if he didn't do anything, that once we know everything and once everything is public, that he would look worse if he didn't take quick action.
I'm glad that you said that, because I was going to say maybe it isn't as political as it seems. I mean, he has this body cam video. He's seen it. He knows what's on it. He doesn't have a political death wish. He must think that it justifies the charges.
Right.
Well, let's stick with that for a second. Is it why not then release the body cam video, which I believe the Globe has asked for it, and they've refused so far. Why not release it if it looks that clear?
Good question. I mean, the standard answer is that it's under investigation, and that gives them a reason not to do it. But they cite the body cam video in the complaint. They say what they claim is on it. So, like, why not release it? When I asked him that question, he said it's because it taints the jury. It would taint the jury pool. And that's the standard answer. For once, the Boston City Council seems to be standing up a bit. They voted for a resolution asking for the Boston Police to at least, come up with some protocol or some standard for when you release them or not. And so far, they've gotten no response.
Yeah, I mean, body cam video is released all the time by police departments. And as we saw in Minneapolis, there was the police, the ICE officer's cell phone video was released by the government, although it might have been slightly edited. I'm not sure. But there was also a lot of other video in Minneapolis, and yet the two sides remain at loggerheads over who was responsible for what happened when the ICE officer shot and killed a protester in a car. So, Abdallah, do you think that there's any echoes here to Minneapolis? And do you think possibly that that the district attorney maybe had Minneapolis on his mind when he decided to bring these charges?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. I really don't know how to answer that, again, because we don't know the full extent of what happened. But certainly, I mean, there's a clamor for more accountability of law enforcement. And so it makes sense for prosecutors right now to be tougher, especially if district attorneys are up for re-election. I think
be tougher with the police.
Be tougher with law enforcement generally. Right. At least this type of law enforcement. So that's, I think, maybe part of the calculus. But I will also say this is one thing that strikes me as strange about all of this is that when he was running for district attorney, he had been interim district attorney after Rachel Rollins had left the post. He didn't really strike me, or I think many others, as that politically astute. Kevin Hayden wasn't necessarily a great campaigner. He also made a lot of mistakes on the campaign and gaffes. He was not necessarily, some political genius, or didn't necessarily strike me as one. And so I don't necessarily view the situation, having that background, I don't necessarily view the situation as Hayden playing three-dimensional chess or really knowing what might come next, which is why I lean on the idea that maybe the video is just really that bad.
It's a solid prosecution.
It's a very solid prosecution. I mean, why would he take this step if he thought that he could lose?
But who is good at three-dimensional chess? Michelle Wu. And she's had some criticisms that she hasn't been tough enough on police and hasn't held them accountable. And maybe, I don't know, maybe she convinced him that it was a good thing and that it helps her more than it helps him, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's interesting. Joan, sticking with you, you reported out a great editorial and column about a week ago about how the city had denied a permit to the Emerald Necklace Conservancy to hold an event they've been holding for years in a city park in Jamaica Plain. And, it perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not coincidentally, the Conservancy has been doing battle with the mayor over White Stadium. And so I'm wondering what you think is going on there. Is the mayor, to some degree, as was suggested in our pieces, just playing hardball with her opponents here?
Well, my instinct on that one is to say yes, she is, because it would have just been easier to, I think, give them the permit. This group has gotten a permit from the city for, I think, 21 years, which is a fairly long time. It's their big fundraiser of the year. The city's explanation for denying it is that they are the only group with a ticketed event to get such a permit. And that may be true. But given everything else that's happening, the Emerald Necklace Conservancy has filed a lawsuit against the city trying to stop the mayor from a development plan that she has for the now demolished White Stadium. She's partnering with a women's soccer team, and they're trying to stop it, saying that she's privatizing public land. Interestingly, or not, the city's reason for denying their permit is that they were privatizing public land by having, like a private ticketed event
There's
there.
a little tit
So
for
it
tat.
does seem a little tit for tat. It does seem a little bit petty. I don't know, in baseball, is that what, brushback or chin music or something like that? And she's pretty good at that.
It's also quite a coincidence that they chose to enforce that law right now. I mean, yeah, you don't know, but it is the timing is very much a big coincidence. So, if it actually, it's not, maybe not a coincidence at all.
They didn't really deny it was a coincidence.
Yeah.
I mean, in talking to them, they weren't really denying that there was a motive to it.
Yeah. So some people say this is a pattern for the mayor, that she takes out grudges, she holds grudges, and uses her power in City Hall to block people from doing things, getting permits, or just to show her sort of peak with people who have challenged her. One example that's been cited is that she skipped a St. Patrick's Day breakfast hosted by Senator Nick Collins, perhaps because he blocked her property tax plan on Beacon Hill. Abdallah, I'm curious about your thoughts. Do you think this is a pattern on her part, and that she's sort of learning, the skill set of holding grudges and, pushing back on rivals?
I think Joan would know better than I would, but I think part of this is an example of how Wu does politics, and also how she's always done politics. I mean, she has sharper elbows than appears from her charisma and from her public persona, and she's not above nursing grudges, and she's not above pushing people aside once they become inconvenient, and she's also leaned on her power, her political appeal, the fact that she won re-election so handily also gave her more confidence, but she's always kind of governed with that kind of energy of this big city mayor that is a powerful mayor, and don't cross me, kind of attitude. And it has largely worked for her. And it's not only just from grudges, but like when you think about her political career more broadly, who she endorsed, she hasn't endorsed, those oftentimes seem to be very politically astute decisions. And she doesn't always fall in line with the left ideologically. She doesn't seem always super ideological about these decisions that she makes. Even back when she was on city council, for example, when she endorsed for city council president in her first term, she endorsed Bill Linehan, who was seen as a more conservative council member at the time. I think there was a last-minute challenge by Ayanna Pressley. But then it worked out for Wu. The year after, or the next session, she became city council president. So she knows how to make these decisions, and I think she's unafraid of challenging, her base or kind of going against conventional wisdom of what she may do just because of who she's aligned with.
Joan, people often say that she's picked up some of these strategic approaches from a mentor of hers, former Mayor Tom Menino.
You just took my answer away. I was going to say there's a two-word answer. Tom Menino. I mean,
you think it's true, in other words?
Absolutely. I mean, she's very much in that mode. He was known as a bearer of huge grudges. One difference is he reveled in them. I mean, he would just sort of laugh or sort of grumble or grump or whatever, and
very publicly
acknowledge that he kind of had a grudge, whereas she doesn't ever want to acknowledge, what's like what you see in front of your eyes. I don't know if that makes her better, or if she had maybe a little bit more humor about it, it might not seem quite. The elbows might not seem quite as sharp. And that could just be a generational thing, a gender thing, just a difference in style and approach. But I think she's very much in the Menino mode.
Well, so I think a lot of people would say Menino was a pretty successful mayor. You think that's fair to say?
He was there for 20 years.
There for 20 years. Does that suggest this is going to work for Wu as well?
Yes, but I don't think she wants to be there for 20 years. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think she wants to be mayor for life like he was.
But one thing that I'm also struck by here is, these decisions that she makes and the strategic choices she makes in these kinds of moments is sometimes incongruent with her approaches to other aspects of her governing. So sometimes she does exhibit caution, and she's afraid of alienating groups of people. I mean, we've been talking about this a lot, but redeveloping Blue Hill Avenue with the bus lanes, for example. With the bike lanes last year during the election, she showed more caution. So sometimes I think it's hard to really predict and understand when she's going to kind of put her foot down and exercise her political capital, and when she's going to be more cautious. I don't think I've quite figured that out as to how she makes those decisions.
I would also say that the bridge burning right now might not be this might not be the best time for it. Even though she's coming off this great election win where she basically didn't have an opponent, the city is facing tougher fiscal times. I would think it might be a time where you'd want to build some bridges and get people all behind you on the same page. I don't see signs of that, but I suppose it's possible.
And we're going to start looking to the north in the Senate race in Maine. So there we have Governor Janet Mills is running against oyster farmer Graham Platner. In recent news, our own Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren endorsed Platner, who's really the insurgent and a newcomer to politics. Mills, who's been around for a long time, has the full backing of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, which means the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, who is arguably the most powerful Democrat in the country right now. Abdallah, what do you make of this? And to what degree is this really a battle for kind of like the party itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think Maine is one of those primaries this year that really is about, the battle for the heart of the Democratic Party. Like, this is representative of, or at least a lot of people are going to look at it as representative of a broader battle, factional battle within the Democratic Party of the direction they should go in these midterms and beyond, and what the Democratic Party should look like after Trump. And I think part of that is really evident in just looking at the polls. I mean, the fact that Janet Mills, sitting governor, is polling, according to some polls, at like 28% or something, is really stunning. I mean, that's not, that's not close, but it's also really bad, I mean, for her. Yeah. And so that, I think, is really shocking here. And it shows how insurgents are really representing, this frustration that a lot of Democratic voters have with the establishment. And that's not true everywhere, all across the board, in every congressional district or in every state even. But there is this appetite in a lot of parts of the country where as soon as you're aligned in any way with the establishment, even if it's just the way you look, people are going to turn away from you and just support, anybody else who looks different, maybe doesn't wear a suit, maybe is a little, scruffy and rough around the edges, and maybe swears a little bit, and tattoos. And maybe that's why a lot of centrist and establishment figures are starting to throw around, awkward, expletives here and there just to pretend to be authentic. But I think that's the kind of battle we're seeing in the Maine primary that's representative of this broader factional dispute within the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Well, Joan, speaking of tattoos, so Platner has endured like a string of, sort of mini scandals, you could call them, starting with a tattoo that he got as a Marine that has been associated with the Nazis. He's said all kinds of inflammatory things about women and sexual assault victims on Reddit. Mills also has a recent ad that criticized demeaning things he said about sexual assault victims on Reddit years ago. So Platner has apologized for all this, and I think he's tried to cover up the tattoo with another tattoo. But he almost seems like Trump-like in his ability to surmount what feel like really serious, problems or misbehavior he's had in the past. What do you make of that? Is that have we changed our attitude towards these kinds of controversies, or are they so minor that maybe it makes sense that people aren't holding them against him anymore?
Well, it's interesting to think that the baggage that would have completely derailed somebody in the past is now something that Senator Elizabeth Warren and other progressives are just willing to overlook and say none of that matters. Because he's not Chuck Schumer, because he wears jeans and a flannel shirt, because he's a little bit scruffy, because he says he's an oyster farmer. I mean, I don't really get it, to be honest. And I don't really understand why Governor Mills, who's won 2 terms, is really doing so poorly in the polls. I guess I'd have to know more about Maine politics to speak to that.
And 4 terms as Attorney General, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
What's
she
that
is
mean?
a
Two-year terms. 4
she
two-year
is
terms.
a fixture, and she is an older woman. I think she's 77 or 78-ish, and people keep on adding the 6 years to what she would be if she won the Senate seat. Somehow they don't seem to do that to Ed Markey, or it's not hurting him in the same way.
Yeah.
So I just wonder a little bit about the gender factor, and if an older woman running is more vulnerable than an older man. I think it's just Platner is 41. I mean, he's young, he's attractive, he does throw around the F word a lot, and that works for him. I don't know if it would work for her.
Yeah.
Well, does that mean Susan Collins is going to be in big trouble because she's in her 70s also?
She could be. I mean, I think there is a fatigue with the same old faces on Capitol Hill, and that applies to men and women. And in this case, I mean, Susan Collins has come back from the dead several times, I think, but this, metaphorically. It seems like I think that she could be in trouble. That he even though people say she'll use the same baggage against him that hasn't worked for Mills and that it'll work for her, I'm not sure that it will. And that could be a good thing.
I think also part of this is part of the age thing and how it factors in this race is that she would be a freshman senator, and I think that maybe is part of what makes it such an evident issue in this race, that she would be starting her tenure in Congress as 78 or 79 years old. Whereas, Ed Markey has served a long time. Doesn't change the fact that he's an old fixture in D.C. But I think that's also part of it, is that she would be a freshman senator at such an old age. I think leaves a lot of people clamoring for something new, younger, fresher face. And I think that's just one factor out of many that we were talking about of establishment and anti-establishment.
Right.
I have one more thought about the race too, which is I think there are a lot of there's a lot of messaging that candidates espouse that I think identifies to voters who's establishment and who's not. And there are all these battles within the Democratic Party, maybe purity tests or litmus tests as to where you fall. And I think one of those is Gaza. And this is a Senate race in Maine. And of course, it doesn't seem like in Maine, Gaza's top of mind for everybody. And I don't think it is. And I don't think that's what's going to decide this race. But I do think, for example, the fact that he has called for an arms embargo in Israel, that he has called what Israel has done in Gaza a genocide, indicates to a lot of voters, particularly progressives within the party, of which there are many in Maine, in the base, that, that's the kind of politics he stands for. It's kind of a proxy issue for a lot of that explains a lot of other things. And I think, when it comes to your establishment credibility or anti-establishment credibility, that messaging is really important and allows you to transcend any kind of identity baggage you have. Bernie Sanders is really old, but is able to transcend that. There are a lot of politicians who are old, and I think gender absolutely has to do with it too. There's no question. But I think so long as you identify that your ideas are not status quo, Ed Markey loves to say this. It's not my age; it's the age of my ideas. Biden used to say that all the time. That their ideas represent the young. I think there is some truth to that. It's like if your ideas, or if you're campaigning on something that is about moving away from the status quo, moving away from the establishment, you're able to transcend scandals. You're able to transcend any kind of baggage that your campaign might otherwise be, dragged by.
I would say it depends on what you're moving away from. For example, just to bring it back to Massachusetts, Seth Moulton, has not been able to move away from the comments he made about transgender athletes, and that still is sort of a purity test for progressives.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's just like that. I think there are these indicators for a lot of voters that if you say something here or there about particularly explosive issues, if you folded, then I think that's going to be a mark against you for a very long time.
But I think what's surprising to me and maybe to Chuck Schumer and to a lot of national Democrats is the idea that Maine is fundamentally a pretty purple state, right? It doesn't entirely surprise me that Ed Markey, who's a charismatic guy, is doing really well in Massachusetts, which is so very blue. But Maine, Medicaid, Medicare for all isn't necessarily a winning message, or maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe Maine is changing. But do we think that Platner, who's not only been very progressive in his ideas about ending military aid to Israel, but also calling for major taxes on the wealthy, and talks about billionaires incessantly, and wants to have health care, universal health care. Are those winning ideas in Maine, do we think?
They seem to be, if you believe the polls, and I think that's what drew Elizabeth Warren to him, that populist campaign.
Yeah, I think you're also seeing this drift away from standard left-right politics. And I think, you're seeing, for example, politicians like Josh Hawley, who in a lot of ways can be viewed as a hard right, Republican, but then adopts these ideas that Elizabeth Warren likes. There are these coalitions that are being built, not right versus left, but these coalitions of just anti-status quo, anti-establishment. Focusing ire on the billionaires is really popular across the board. That's why we're seeing a shift in how we're promoting ideas for tax policy in this country, both on the left and the right. There's this, even among Republicans, the party for a long time that was about tax cuts for the rich, and still is in what they have passed, but we're seeing more and more Republicans call for taxing the rich in a way that, it would be unheard of 10, 20, and definitely 30 years ago. There's this move away from taxing middle class to taxing the rich, and I think that transcends party lines. And so I think part of Platner's appeal in the general electorate isn't that he's a left-wing candidate, it's that he's anti-establishment, and that coalition is broader than just hard left.
Right. And I think it's also interesting that it's not enough to be anti-Trump, because I thought Janet Mills would get a lot more mileage out of that moment, at the year ago at the governor's lunch when she said to Trump, "See you in court."
Right.
And that actually was over transgender athletes in Maine.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's just a blip on the screen that hasn't helped her at all. And that's kind of surprising.
That's true.
One last question on Platner. To what degree do we think he's doing well because he's kind of a tough guy? He's a Marine with tattoos. He was in combat. He kind of exudes working class tough guyness. Is that a thing here, do you think?
I like the term tough guyness.
Yeah. Well,
you can use it.
I'm always, curious about whether a woman would, who did the same would be able to advance that way. And my guess would be no. So there is like a tough guy thing to it. Is he really an oyster farmer, though?
That's a good question.
I think aesthetics do play into this, and aesthetics are always gendered, and I think the way a woman candidate has to be in order to appear authentic is fundamentally different from how a guy does it. I think that's always been true in how brash you can be, how angry you can be, how much you yell. Those things are all true. But I think in the Democratic Party especially, there's this real desire, and especially among the left, of building this working class coalition. And the drift of the white working class away from the Democratic Party over the years, which has been especially evident in the last several elections, I think there's a real desperate desire for Democrats to own the white working class again, the white working class vote again. And so when you have somebody who just aesthetically embodies that stereotype of what a white working class guy looks like, a farmer, a fisherman, tough guy, bearded, former vet, former Marine, I think that is appealing to a lot of people because it's like they want to point at Platner and say, look, he's our guy too. He represents these people and they're part of our party. And, I think that boosted somebody like Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania. I think that helped his campaign at the time, the fact that he never wore a suit and just wore shorts in winter and, his hoodies in the Senate. I think there is an aesthetic appeal to Platner that is underlying the campaign. I think it definitely has helped him. I don't know if it's certainly not the deciding factor, but I think, the tough guyness that he talked about, his raspy voice, I think that does absolutely help buoy his campaign.
Well, I want to close with a question about Iran. So gas prices are now at over $4. That's the average for the whole country. It's higher in some places. And the Strait of Hormuz remains closed despite all the fulminations of our president. And now Trump is threatening to maybe send the Marines into Iran, actual boots on the ground. These are all things I think his supporters did not expect or want. And at least some of them seem kind of upset about it. So do you guys think that an extended conflict with Iran is beginning to hurt him with his base? Or, like everything else with his base, will they stick with him?
I don't know if I want to go first, but I think the hardcore Trump base, I think he has a solid 30 to 35% of this country that's just not going to quit Trump over anything. And even if they're angry with him, they'll forgive him eventually. He's their guy. That's not going to change. But I think there is, part of both MAGA, but also part of, the center of the electorate that was swayed to vote for Trump. I think this war definitely helps, push those voters back to Democrats in the next cycle, including in these midterms. And I do think there is a fracture within the MAGA world more broadly, because one of the elements of Trumpism that really helped and fueled his rise to power was his anti-establishment credentials, just by being an outsider, this idea that he's an outsider, even though he's a billionaire, but that he was this guy who is going to be a shock to the system. Right. I don't think you can get more establishment than being a pro-war, supporting or launching a war. War hawks kind of embody the establishment that so many people came to resent out of Washington. So I think Trump launching this war, persisting in it, and especially if he sends ground troops, I think only makes that fracture worse for the Republican Party. And it might not mean that his approval ratings will dip among his most loyal supporters, but it might discourage some from showing up to the next election because it's actions like this that disillusion voters. It's when you really put your faith in somebody that promised you that he's anti-war, that he's anti-establishment, that he's all this and that, but then falls in line with the establishment of his party, just like the person you assumed just like the politicians that you wanted to move away from, they kind of fall back into that mold, and I think that fracture becomes permanent and it just disillusions voters.
I think Trump is looking for a way out. I don't think it's as much a debacle, though, as much of the press paints it, not at least yet, because he can still say the leadership of Iran is gone, the military infrastructure is destroyed, we're better off. Prove me wrong. And he's just really good at writing the story that he wants to tell.
I agree, provided the world doesn't go into recession. Joan Vennochi is a Globe Opinion columnist. Abdallah Fayyad writes for the Ideas section. Thanks for being with us.